Hello, again, I'm Robert Fithin, doing that 1983 deep dive thing, rating and reviewing albums from 1983, doing it chronologically by original release date, and we are up to July 25th of 1983. That is when this album was released, the debut from Metallica called Kill 'Em All! I was 10 years old in 1983, well, at least in July of 1983. Wouldn't turn 11 until, September. But I didn't know Metallica when I was 10 years old. I didn't really find out about Metallica until I was probably in the 8th or ninth grade. I started seeing the t-shirts appear. There seemed to be like two guys in my junior high, two types anyway, when it came to the rock shirts. It was either the Bon Jovi, Motley Crue guys. Well, I guess that's two different ones. So there were three. There were the Bon Jovi guys, there were the Motley Crue guys, and there were the Metallica guys. The Metallica guys are the ones that you did not fuck with at all. And so I started knowing more about them right around Master of Puppets era. So I didn't know Metallica when I was 10. I didn't hear this CD probably until like the late 80s, right after like maybe around Injustice for All time. And then I had a friend later on that had the tape of this. Actually, I knew someone in college that had the record of this, an original release. It must have been, because it would have been, well, maybe it was a second issue or something like that. It was an early version anyway. And it was autographed. All four. Including Cliff Burton. And, man, I don't even know what that thing would be worth now. It was just the Cliff autograph alone. But, yeah, all four of the guys autographed this. And one of them put, fucking, like, kill 'em fucking all. But anyway, excellent debut. Again, it's a great album anyway. But when you hear it, and I've said this about a couple albums when I'm doing these deep dives, when you hear it in context of all the other stuff coming out in 1983, you really get a great idea of why these guys were so important. Listening to a lot of the metal stuff, it's got a lot of that 80s style going on. It's got a lot of the squealing guitars. It's got that, every once in a while, the guitar will be rocking along and it'll do that little 80s squawk thing. It'll do the horse neighing thing. There is none of that on this. This is total, 90s rock in 1983, basically. And these guys way ahead of the curve. They're pioneers. They're making the curve. They're blazing the trail, so to speak. There's very little screeching on here. It happens a little bit with James Hetfield, like in Phantom Lord, a little bit in Metal Militia. Of course, they got the Metal Militia. That's probably the most telling that this is 1983, because they've got a song called Metal Militia. But little bit of just a little shrieks here every once in a while. But mostly this is bellowed out, total later metal done in 1983 by Metallica. Again, listen to the other metal albums from 1983, including Pantera's, and you will know why these guys were so important and people were blown away by Metallica when they were first out. Every single track on here is excellent. There's nothing on here that's skippable, certainly. I mean, obviously to my tastes, my opinion, there are tracks that I like better than others. Seek and Destroy was the first one that kind of stuck out to me with that repeating guitar riff and all that. Why are the drums so pedestrian on that? It just seems like he's not really hitting them as hard as he does on the other songs. I don't know. But still, Seek and Destroy, excellent. Whiplash, again, one of my absolute favorites on here. Just total thrash speed, just rocking it full speed, full steam ahead type of thing. Hit the Lights, the very opening track with that kind of distorted guitar building up, and this, what is this going to be? And then bam, goes right into it. The Four Horsemen is pretty cool. I would put that on the second tier of the songs I like here. I know a lot of people that's their favorite. I think it was one of the ones that was promoted separately as maybe a single or whatever. It's not like any of these were on top 40 radio. But, we're going to take your life. Four Horsemen's pretty cool. Hit the Lights. I've already mentioned that. Jump in the Fire. I think my big three are Whiplash, Seek and Destroy, and Jump in the Fire. And then, of course, you got Cliff Burton's Anesthesia bass solo, which doesn't sound like a typical bass solo, especially 1983. There's none of this thumb and kind of stuff going on. Tapping bass, sounds like a lead guitarist with a really low guitar, basically. So yeah, just great stuff all the way through here. Total trailblazing. Like I said, I'm not the biggest Metallica fan overall. I think they have some decent songs scattered around here or there in various albums later on. I'm not a Black Album hater. I think Enter Sandman is terrific. For what it is, they totally nailed that. I have mentioned this before, but in rock radio, I was the host of our version of Mandatory Metallica. That's a thing that a lot of rock stations did all over the country. Had, however they would handle it. What we did was played 4 Metallica songs in a row every weeknight, and that was me that did that. And we got a promotional CD from Elektra for doing that, double CD Mandatory Metallica with a bunch of stuff that go up to in 1997, because it says on here, hey, the big release, Reload, coming up in November 1997. But yeah, the way I would do it is I would always play 2 90s songs and 2 80s songs every night, just to kind of mix it up. And eventually I played everything from them. But I mean, I really got to know Metallica very well doing that. Not only did I do Mandatory Metallica, but the station at the time played Metallica every 75 minutes. It was our most rotated artist. There was no other. Every other artist was 90-minute separation, at most. So I mean, most artists we play every 2.5 hours or 3 hour, whatever, however they came up. Metallica was like clockwork. Every 75 minutes we would play Metallica and then do 4 Metallica songs. I want to say it was at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or whatever every weeknight. So a lot of Metallica, and this is one of the best. The first 3 really are my favorites. I drop off with And Justice for All, but this one, so glad to be able to talk about this. Stellar. I'm not going to go into any more of it because it's Metallica Kill 'Em All. There's all kinds of videos if you want to know the absolute history and the production and how the Metallica got together and the tuning and all that kind of stuff. But 5 stars to sum it up. Kill 'Em All, debut from Metallica. On July 25th, 1983, the band Zapp released their 3rd album called Zapp 3, of course. I say of course like it's obviously their 3rd album. That doesn't always happen. There's Van Halen 3. That wasn't their 3rd album. Traveling Wilburys Volume 3. That wasn't their 3rd album. But I digress. Zapp is that electro-funk band that's always got that electronic processing on their vocals. They sound like it's a perfect band to do the robot to. But yeah, so Zapp 3 is their 1983 release. And man, I wish I think it's the Cylons effect on the Eventide harmonizer. I used to have one of those when I worked in Springfield, and man, I love that thing. It was this, an Eventide harmonizer is basically this piece of equipment that puts all kinds of effects on your voice, maybe, also things like flange and echo and different. It's all different types, and it's got several buttons on it where you can adjust different things, and it's got the dial on it where you can turn it up and down. And I love that thing. I know you can do a lot of that stuff these days with like a pull down and plug-ins on a computer or whatever, but there was just something about having an actual piece of equipment that, big, huge studios use to record major albums. I had it in the radio studio, and then one day it was just gone. They came in, took it out. Oh, nobody uses that anyway. Nobody really knows how to use it. It's like, first of all, I read the instructions cover to cover, was using it all the time for the morning show for various voice effects, but okay, just go ahead and take it out. I wonder how much one of those costs. Buy one for my damn self. Anyway, Zapp 3, they got the electronic robot voice going on, especially on side 1. Heartbreaker! It's that kind of thing. Heartbreaker! This version has a misprint. It has Play Some Blues coming on before I Can Make You Dance. Actually, I Can Make You Dance is first. I can make you dance if you want to. These are basically like 7, 9-minute long songs. Each one on side 1 sounds like it could be a 12-inch single on its own. I mean, these things just keep going and going and going and going. Very repetitive. Sounds like the type of thing that's more made to burn up the dance floor than it is for home listening. You don't put this on necessarily with a pair of headphones and sit there and... that's not what Zapp is for. Zapp is for the dance floor. So if you're out at a club and this comes on, everybody's just going to be burning it up and, sweating and everything. It's going on for 9 minutes and whatever. That's what this album is all about. Play some blues. Not necessarily a blues song. It does have some blues element, a little bit of harmonica in there. But, it's a dance track. Side 2 Again, they got that R&B thing going on where side 1 is full-on dance, side 2 slows it down a little bit. But they don't really go like full-on Quiet Storm or something like that. This is Zapp, so they're still got the dance funk thing going on. But side 2 is a little more subdued. They definitely turn down the effect, and you can actually hear their natural voices more. We Need the Buck, all about, needing the buck, man. You got to have the money. That's why you go to work. Tut Tut is like actually a nice little jazz little thing going on, but it's still got the funk to it. It's still got the Zapp sound, so it's all right. Instrumental there, and then bizarrely it ends with this minute-long instrumental called "Do Wah Diddy" live. It's basically the band being introduced on stage, playing for about 45 seconds, and then it fades out. I don't get what that was for. I don't know why you introduced the band on a live on the last track that lasts a minute, but. Anyway, so I'd give this 3 stars. Like I said, it's more meant for like a dance floor, with a club music or whatever. It's not the kind of thing you really pick apart and, you're really listening for different things. I mean, it's just thumping dance music, electro, robot voice, 9 minutes, 7 minutes long, repetitious, that type of thing. But you know what? They do it well. That's their thing, man. They're the kings of it. So 3 stars for Zapp 3. If you don't know Zapp, they had some tragedy later on in their career. First of all, this band is full of brothers. They're the Troutman brothers. So it's a family band. And they could have called it the Troutman Brothers Band or whatever, but they decided to call it Zapp. But Roger was the leader. He was the guy singing. He was the guy, that mostly did the arrangements and everything. And he was the leader. And then the other brothers had the different instruments. Larry is another brother. He was the percussionist. He actually ended up shooting and killing Roger in 1999. And then he went down the block and shot himself. So tragedy ended this band, unfortunately. So if you know about that, you're kind of listening to these old albums with knowing that's coming up in their lives. And man, it's not, it kind of has that dark cloud, that sometimes you listen to music and then a tragedy's coming up and it's like, man, that's too bad. They don't know what's going to happen. They sound like they're having a great time, a lot of fun, but they don't know what's up. So yeah, Roger Zapp killed by his own brother Larry, and then Larry kills himself. At least that's the story, And then everybody just kind of broke. I think they got together again like a few years later and did some touring, did some concerts, but that's about it for Zapp. That's about it for Zapp. It is now July 26, 1983, and Oingo Boingo, featuring, of course, Danny Elfman, have just released their 3rd album, and this one is called Good For Your Soul. And Oingo Boingo, one of those bands that, they're quirky, they're silly, they're very fun. Sometimes they can be very biting, spot on, along with that, they're kind of all over the place. Remind me a little bit of the Tubes in some ways, but they've got more, their sound though is more of like a ska type thing occasionally. They get into a little bit of a Jamaican rhythms on some songs. Sometimes they're just full on 80s synth pop. So the music is kind of, a little bit of variety in there as well. But yeah, that's our good old Oingo Boingo. But I think that the reason this band never got really as popular as they maybe could have been, as far as on the radio and on MTV or whatever, is because of that name. Oingo Boingo. That just sounds ridiculous. That sounds silly. Something that you don't take seriously. And if they are going to have a hit, they're probably going to end up being a one-hit wonder like Bow Wow Wow. Oingo Boingo, Bow Wow Wow. It's a band name that people would talk about in TV shows when they wanted to show how weird the kid is getting now. Oh, the teenager's getting weird. He's into Oingo Boingo and Bow Wow Wow. And so they ended up not being a one-hit wonder. They ended up being a no-hit wonder. The songs that people know, I think they know because of movies, that were always on premium cable channels. Like they did the theme from Weird Science. They had Dead Man's Party. Those are the 2 songs that most people associate with Oingo Boingo. But this album, Good For Your Soul, actually starts off with a song called What Do You Want to Be? Which, you want to be like someone on TV. That is actually featured in the movie Bachelor Party. And this soundtrack has 2 Oingo Boingo songs on it, but it does not have that one. So Oingo Boingo included on this soundtrack from this wonderful movie from 1984, featuring, of course, Tom Hanks, Tawny Kitaen, George Grizzard, Adrian Zemed, and, of course, an unforgettable performance from Brett Clark, star of Young Lady Chatterley 2. But enough about Bachelor Party. Back to Oingo Boingo. Yeah, this album is very fun. It's very upbeat. It's exciting even in places. It really is a peppy little early 80s thing that a lot of people don't think about. Like I said, a lot of people associate Oingo Boingo with a couple of tracks that come a little bit later. This is kind of early for them. They didn't they play the US Festival? I think they played the US Festival. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. But yeah, so what do you want to be starts it off, and that actually even the title of that reminds me of the Tube song, "What Do You Want from Life?" Basically, kind of the same thing. You want all these things that are, you're told you're supposed to have, you're supposed to want. Also, Little Guns, that's the wrap-up song on here. Little guns, little minds, little people, and they have a song. Of course, it's 1983, so they're looking into the future. They've got "Wake Up, It's 1984." All about what we can expect, the life to be like. It's going to turn into a George Orwell novel, basically, in 1984. I don't know if that fully happened. A lot of people were thinking that was going to happen. I think they missed it just a little bit on the 1984 predictions. I don't think it's more about Big Brother being some sort of ominous, secret spying force that's watching all of us and tracking all of us, and we're doing that ourselves. I don't think they saw that coming, that we wouldn't need a big, we're taking care of that ourselves. We are voluntarily putting all of our information, everything about ourselves out there online. I like to put just my musical opinions on YouTube, and that's about it. I don't really go much further than that, although I do expect, like Brian Wilson's big face to be showing up at the door, Come out, we know what you've been saying about us. Anyway, that's spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. Oingo Boingo, Good For Your Soul, that's the title track, that's the second song on here. That one's actually pretty good too. Upbeat, funny, quirky, the Pictures of You is on here, not the Cure song. This one's better than the Cure song. This one is same thing though, they're looking at pictures, you see your lips speaking and the wind blowing or whatever. They've got No Spill Blood. That's kind of a take on Island of Dr. Moreau, where he's got the guy that's, telling the animals that they're human, and yes, we are human. So that's what that's from. So all kinds of little references going on, all kinds of little scenarios. Very fun, very upbeat. A little bit of ska, a little bit of, pop punk type stuff going on, a little bit of synth pop. That's our Oingo Boingo. I'm going to give this 4 stars. And this is like, I think only the second Oingo Boingo album I've ever heard all the way through. Not a band really to be judged by their name, although their name kind of is appropriate, but it makes them sound a little bit sillier and a little bit fluffier and kind of incidental than they really are. There's some smart stuff here, there's some silly stuff here, there's some wacky stuff here, but most of it's pretty good stuff. Lively and entertaining. Oingo Boingo, 4 stars for Good For Your Soul. On July 27th, 1983, we get the second Neil Young album of the year. Now, I've already reviewed Trans at the very beginning of the series. This one is called Everybody's Rockin'. And this is another Neil Young album that doesn't really sound like a Neil Young album. And this is the one that Geffen ended up saying, you know what, enough's enough. And basically tried to take him to court. He did have in his contract, though, that he has total artistic license over everything, so they did not win that. But I can see their point. I can see his point, I can see their point, but I've made this point before in other videos. When you do a, hey, record label, fuck you album, you're also saying fuck you to your fans and your supporters and the people who have bought your concert tickets and bought your albums over the years. I do think that Trans, from what I understand, was an artistic statement. It was something he wanted to make, especially for his son. This one does not sound like an artistic statement. This sounds like a joke. And from what I have read over the years, I think this is a joke. I think literally started off with a winking joke. Basically, after the Trans album, Geffen wanted him to release, release a rock and roll record. So he, being a smartass, releases a literal rock and roll album, as in 50s rockabilly rock and roll. What they should have said was release a goddamn Neil Young album, cut the bullshit. But they used the term rock and roll, so he took that and then, okay, I'll release a rock and roll, I'll show you. Not funny, dude. You got fans, man. You got people that are paying their money to buy your records, to buy your concert ticket. I can't stand these fuck you record companies. Bob Dylan's self-portrait, Lou Reed did it, a bunch of people did it, and it turns out the same way every time. It's the fans that lose every time. They lose total. They live in a bubble where it's just them and their record label. The fans are over here, then I'm thinking about that. They're not even thinking about the people who are working hard, making money, putting down that money so they can buy a Neil Young album. No, they're not thinking about that. They're thinking about business and how they're going to screw over the suits. Anyway, everybody's rocking. So it's less than 25 minutes long. It's like 24:55, super short album, more like an EP. And it's all rockabilly tunes. Some of them are covers. Some of them are, he wrote specifically in a rockabilly style. He's got a band called the Shocking Pinks that are only on this album, basically put together for this project. And starts off with Betty Lou's Got a New Pair of Shoes. Not the greatest rockabilly song of all time. He's got his own songs on here, I'm fond of Wanda because she always wanna. He's got a song about wanting that jelly roll. I don't want to hear about Neil Young wanting a no. No. He does a cover of Jimmy Reed's Bright Lights, Big City. The band is competent. It's got a rockabilly sound. It's got the rockabilly echo on Neil Young's voice. We're checking all the rockabilly boxes here. He's dressed in a rockabilly suit, and he's got the rockabilly pose on the cover, and it's the name and everything written in little rockabilly diamond, rockabilly. Check them all off. I don't like. I feel like the joke's on us. Is the problem here. Lowest selling album of all his career. I think he didn't release another one for 2 years, and this is a guy who's coming out with non-stop albums. He learned his lesson. He gets back in the, Neil Young, and it comes out and then releases classic albums like Freedom and Ragged Glory, and goes on that Weld tour, and he blows back up again, and everybody's forgotten about this album basically, which is probably for the best. It's not a bad listen. As far as, a throwback rockabilly album, there are better ones from other bands who take this a little more seriously. But when you know why this exists, and I can't turn my mind off and pretend like I don't know why this exists, I don't know what's really going on, then it takes away from the fun. It takes away from the spirit. It's just very cynical and a joke, and rockabilly should not be cynical. You know what I mean? So it's kind of hard to enjoy this knowing what I know when listening to it. There is a song on here called Payola Blues, which would have been a really biting, really, gut punch kind of song on another Neil Young album, if it would have been done in a rockabilly style, because that's when Payola was first sort of exposed back in the Alan Freed, and he mentions him at the beginning of the song Days. That's when the Payola thing, even though Payola was going on well into the 90s and 2000s, and Payola never went away. But first exposed in the 50s, so people think Payola, they think 50s. So it would have been cool to have a rockabilly song called, Payola Blues on a Neil Young album as just a singular song mixed in with a bunch of other Neil Young type songs. But on here, it's just another rockabilly song. So it comes off as not as serious as it could be, not as biting as it could be. It just sounds silly, It doesn't work as well, I don't think, as it could have. So even that one doesn't. The whole album is just a misstep, just forgettable. I don't have it, and I have friggin' 45 different Neil Young albums, so I'm not a Neil Young hater. I've pretty much got his entire discography, either on a record or a CD, up until the 2020s when I stopped buying, in 2015 or when I stopped buying a lot of stuff and just, streamed it. But, no, 2 stars for this. And that's, that's just because it's well recorded. It's the band's great. Neil Young sounds okay on the vocal. And they got, like I said, they got all the rockabilly effects and the rockabilly aesthetics going. 2 stars. Not going to listen to this again. I don't care that Betty Lou's got a new pair of shoes. In 1983, the band from Ontario called Killer Dwarfs released their debut self-titled album. And these guys are they're called heavy metal, but I think these guys are much more in just a hard rock vein. The band is great. The band just does this hard rock thing. They're very competent, well recorded as well. Guitars just rocking out, nothing squawking, no horse neighing kind of stuff. Little bit of like high-end shredding every once in a while, but nothing too extreme. They're not showing off or whatever. They're basically rocking out with a nice meaty guitar sound. So I like that about this band. The first song is called Are You Ready? And yes, I am ready for some killer Dwarfs. And then you hear the vocals. The vocals are not great. They are not at the standard of the band, I don't think. He's competent in areas. He kind of sounds like he's going for a Geddy Lee, like early Geddy Lee. Like when Rush was first out kind of sound, maybe going for like a Burke Shelley lead singer, a Budgie, maybe it's in that kind of vein, but he's not quite pulling it off. There are, it's okay in places. It's like, okay, it's he's got the high pitch, whatever. But then there's places like, he just goes way too high. And it's not that kind of soaring heavy metal vocal where you're like, wow, or it's not even a screechy, it's a squealy high thing that sounds like a little 7-year-old girl just sat on a tack or something. It's serious. Check out the ends of the songs Prisoner and Heavy Mental Breakdown for an example of what I'm talking about. Way too squealy, way too like, it's not great. And it's too bad because the band is really tight. Like I said, real great meaty, a full guitar sound and just a basic thing that you can just rock to. Like I said, not trying to, show you off all their guitar skills, play every note on the fret, type of stuff. But it's a great overall sound with this band. But the lead vocalist is what brings it down a couple of notches. In other places, like the song Gotta Lose to Win, the vocals sound a little whiny, I guess. I'm not into it. But the music, the music's where it's at. And if you're listening to the first couple of tracks on here, like the first one, Are You Ready? And then the one that follows that, the music does get a little rougher and harder as the album goes on. So give it, if you just want to hear it for the music and the band, give it a few more songs after the first couple. Killer Dwarfs, like I said, from Ontario. This album never got a release early on anyway. I don't know if I say never, but it originally did not get an American release, although they would show up on Headbangers Ball, because I remember reading about Killer Dwarfs. I saw them saw the name mentioned here and there in places, and I originally thought they were a punk band, because that sounds like the name that a punk band would have. But no, they're straight ahead hard rock, like I said, and then they would show up on Headbangers Ball every once in a while. But just, straightforward hard rock, great meaty guitar sound. The vocals, though, need a little work. And isn't it Killer Dwarves? Wouldn't it be Killer Dwarves? Not Dwarfs? Anyway, 3 stars for this. If you see it someplace you'd have to be in Canada to see it someplace for cheaper, I would assume. In the United States, you're going to have to pay the shipping and all of that. And I've never even seen this album anywhere except for up on the wall. One of those wall albums where, oh my God, killer heavy metal from Canada, rare, don't miss, $120. So don't pay that for it. So Graham Parker is another one of those names that I see and hear a lot, but I don't really know that much about the music. I know that a song called Local Girls is by far the most popular song he has in the U.S. He is, I'm assuming, far, far more popular in the UK than he is here. But usually when I see Graham Parker, it's with a band like Graham Parker and The Shot is usually the one I see. Sometimes I'll see Graham Parker and The Rumor, but rarely do I just see Graham Parker albums. And I was not familiar with this one at all, coming out in July of 1983, called The Real Macaw. And I've never seen this album cover before. That's pretty striking, though. I think I would remember that. But so check this out, and it's decent. It's nice power pop from the early 80s. Doesn't get too cheesy, doesn't get too, experimental or interesting, to say the least. But it's a nice listen. I didn't really hear anything like, oh man, I got to remember that song. I got to put that on my, likes list, or I got to hear that again, or whatever. They're all just kind of like, all right, this is decent for a nice walk on the riverfront with your earbuds in or your headphones on, but that's what this is. It starts off with a song called Just Like a Man, where he's kind of beating himself up a little bit, talking about how he likes to flex his muscle, but he never uses it. I think I know what that means. But so yeah, there's that. There's Passive Resistance, which is the only song that I think of right now that uses the word demographics in the lyrics. So that gets an extra point from me, just for that right there. So interesting lyrics, most of them dealing with, relationships and love songs. Glass Jaw's another one, it's just, either he's at fault and he knows it, or the love situation's just not working out, or, that kind of thing. But decent, basically. A solid 3-star album. When I talk about 3-star albums, this is a perfect example of something that's little better than average, not incredible, decent. That's what I would call this. It does have a little bit of the 80s keyboard thing going on, like in Life Gets Better. You can definitely hear it in that. So it is, like a basic power pop. It does sound a little more 1979, 1980 than 1983, with the exception of those keyboards. And the vocals definitely have that kind of era sound too, with that kind of, I get so wild that I'm making all the wrong connections. It has that real punchy Elvis Costello, Joe Jackson, kind of sound. Although he was out before those guys, so maybe those guys sound more like him. Last, dance before they cut the lights down and end everything. That's a pretty cool way to almost wrap this up. It's one of the near the finale of this album. So decent, yeah, 3 stars for Graham Parker and the Real Macaw. I just really don't know what else to say about this, except for, yeah, he's the guy that always wears the big sunglasses. So right about this time in 1983, the band from Glasgow called Heavy Pettin released their debut self-titled album. At least in the US, it's self-titled. It's one of those albums that it's different in the UK than the US, got a completely different cover, and in the UK it's called Lettin' Loose. But I really like the US cover art in here. Very, very 80s. You're not going to get much more 80s than that. I'm not sure what the guy and the girl are doing in the car, considering they would be on their backs with their heads to each other, with their legs coming out of either side of the window. But anyway, that's a whole different... I don't know what kind of heavy petting that is. But the kind of heavy petting this is a mainstream rock sound that doesn't have keyboards, but it still sounds, like an early 80s, AOR type of thing. The first song is called In and Out of Love, which is not the same as the Bon Jovi song, which would come a couple of years later, but it might as well be. Sounds similar anyway. It's the same vein, So yeah, a lot of the song titles on here, things like In and Out of Love and Love on the Run and Rock Me and Devil in Her Heart and Victims of the Night, and so they all sound like early 80s movie titles, some of them. But this is not great. Let's just get that out, right at the beginning here. Not great. The guitars are okay. There's a little bit of, nice spots here and there. It's that kind of a thing that I mentioned on other albums where, there's a little bright spot here with the guitar. Oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And you're listening. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's kind of cool. Yeah. Meh. Most of it's kind of meh, though. And most of that has to do with the lead singer. He has this kind of whiny, kind of very monotonous voice. It's right up in here and it's kind of, it never really inflects. I mean, there is kind of some screams every once in a while, but it really takes away from the whole album, that lead vocalist, who I think his name is Steve Heyman. But, so yeah, this band, I don't know, didn't really do anything in the US. I don't know how popular they were in England or Scotland or anywhere else, but nothing really here in the US. I see this album every once in a while in like the $5, area as far as price. Still like the artwork though, but this really isn't doing it for me at all. I'm going to give this 2 stars. It does have a song called Hell is Beautiful. It's the very last track on here, and they finally kick it into gear. A little faster, a little more energy. Guitars are kind of rocking out a little more. Got a nice sentiment to it, how hell can be beautiful depending on who you are, that kind of attitude. Similar to Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be from AC/DC, if we're honest up in here. But, yeah, Heavy Pettin', you could skip this. It's one of those things that I've seen a couple of times here and there. you know, the US version. Thought it had a cool cover. Always wanted to get around to hearing what it was all about. Now I know, and I don't really need this in my collection. So before we get too hot and bothered with heavy Pettin, let's wrap up this video rating and reviewing albums from 1983 chronologically. In the next video, it is the debut from Madonna, also Big Country, the goth punk band 45 Grave, another hard rock album from Shrapnel Records. Will it be as good as the others? You'll just have to watch the video and find out. Those and a lot more coming up. Thank you so much for continuing the saga of 1983, as I'm just living in the past at this point, month after month, doing these deep dives. I still love it, though. Really puts things in perspective, and it's a lot of fun listening to all this music, discovering all this music, listening to all this great music that, you know, I haven't heard in years, and some of it I just heard a couple of years ago. Some of it I haven't heard since I've been 15 years old. So awesome, awesome, and thank you so much for doing it with me. And I'm Robert Fithin, and I'll talk to you hopefully again in the next one.